Well, today I am really excited to be interviewing and having a conversation with Ben Hagerty. And Ben has an interesting journey that he has traveled. And not only has he traveled, but he's traveled with his wife, literally traveled. And he is with It's Bree and Ben. Good idea to put your wife first. You know, happy wife, happy life. That's what I always say. And with that, Ben, tell us a little bit about your backstory of how you became vegan, when you became vegan, and how it led into marrying your wife and the travels that you've taken. So let's start with that. I know that's a mouthful.
Welcome to the Vegan Visibility Podcast Show, where your host, Kathleen Gage, shines the spotlight on vegan and plant-based businesses and entrepreneurs from all walks of life committed to cruelty-free eating, healthy lifestyles, animal compassion, and the environment. Enjoy the show.
No, it's fine, Kathleen. And I just want to first say thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I've been a fan for many years, and it's a pleasure.
Thank you.
My story, I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area in the 90s, and upper middle class family. And while my family wasn't a vegetarian or vegan itself, I really did like flavors that lent to that diet and lifestyle. I was always the kid that liked black bean burgers, and I always loved a good salad. So that kind of started that journey for me early in that age. But I never started applying it to my lifestyle until undergrad, when I started seeing more vegans around me kind of introduced the idea to me. And I thought, oh, this is fascinating. But even then, in the late aughties, I was still thinking, I don't know if I could do this. This is I don't know if I could commit to that. But then in 2015, my wife, Bree, as mentioned in the website, and then who's my girlfriend at the time, in 2015, we realized one week that we hadn't eaten any meat, red meat or chicken or anything else that was aside from some little bit of dairy. And we realized how good we felt at the end of that week. We actually had a moment where we looked at each other like, hey, I'm feeling a little more energetic this week. Are you? And she said, yeah. And we were just actually quite surprised that after even just 1 week of abstaining from that one product, we felt really good. So we wanted to give it a try from then. But we didn't want to go cold turkey and just become, okay, let's go straight into being vegan. We wanted to gradually transition into that lifestyle without going into any mishaps along the way. So it could be easy for us. So what that looked like, and I do recommend this for those who are maybe somewhat reticent to experience that lifestyle, is that just do it gradually. First cut out, for us, we cut out red meat the subsequent week, and then a few weeks later, cut out some white meat, then a few months later, fish, and it just kind of went from there. So that was our lifestyle and our experience with veganism for quite a few months. And my wife at the time was working for a vegan publication based in LA, and she had an idea of doing just some articles and a column specifically on vegan business and vegan products, not just in the area but also nationally in the States. So she was kind of thinking of different ways to approach that. She had done some great local articles, particularly through California. Then while she was doing that, we got married in early 2017. And during that time, we were thinking, what should we do for our honeymoon? And as we were thinking about it, we actually did some cost-benefit analysis and realized that if we did a long honeymoon, and we'd always like the idea of doing a road trip afterwards. So we thought, hey, what if we did a road trip for our honeymoon? And we did, and so like I said, we did that benefit analysis and found that if we put all our stuff in storage and just did a road trip for even a year, we would actually save more than $1,000 in rent just by doing that. And this wasn't like doing van life. This was before that. So this was just, the plan was to load up our Prius with the essentials and just travel across the US and Canada for the remainder of the year and seeing the sites and staying in Airbnbs along the way. As for the vegan element of it, well, we entered a vegan lifestyle by that time. So as we're starting the article, we were eating very, very much plant-based. And Bree was still working on her articles and was actually starting to feature destinations and what was there for them. And along the way, I was like her assistant. I was taking some photography for her in these business spaces and in these destinations, and also talking to entrepreneurs that she happened to be talking to these destinations. And just to get some context for you and our listeners, in the course of 6 months, we went from Los Angeles all the way to Vancouver. Then for the rest of the time, we went straight across continental Canada. So just straight from Vancouver all the way to Halifax. And then by September, we dipped down back into through the Maritimes into Maine, and then through the rest of the fall, traversed the United States, hitting like Middle America and the East Coast, and then eventually back to the West Coast. So to date, we have written about and explored 60 destinations looking at the vegan lifestyle. Yeah.
Okay. And that actually leads into a question that I'm sure, not only am I interested in, but the viewers and listeners is, as you were traveling through Canada and through the United States, where did you find the most vegan friendly areas, and where did you find those that were kind of resistant to the term vegan?
Sure. Excellent question. And this was the thing that was fascinating me as I was talking to them. I found that there are a lot of enclaves and really tight-knit communities, even in places that people wouldn't really think about. And that's what lent to part inspiration to our website. It's Bree and Ben, which is a website that is dedicated to creating travel guides and essays about the concept of traveling vegan and plant-based, but also traveling, as we write, traveling kindly or shopping kindly. Is that how do you enter a space and follow the vegan philosophy of yielding the least amount of harm and creating the most amount of good wherever you are?
Right.
So in that regard, as I was exploring that, and those themes were starting to emerge as we were looking into that, I noticed that, of course, as most people know, the coasts, so the west coast of the United States and into Vancouver, and then New England and New York very much were very vegan friendly. They're in terms of I'd say the most vegan businesses and most vegan entrepreneurs per capita.
Interesting.
Yeah, and but like I said, there were really enclaves, even the places we hadn't anticipated. Like we found like a few dozen in St. Louis and Kansas, and a few in Kansas City. That was a big surprise to me because they were really involved and really active in their community and engaging with the philosophy and thinking about it. But then they were also, surrounded by dairy farms and agriculture. So it was very much, while the coast had the most businesses, I found that the places you didn't expect had equal, if not even more so, a sense of community that was embedded in those places. Right. It was really fascinating.
What were some of those locations that one wouldn't expect? Like I would think the heartland, the Midwest, to me, it would be hard to find vegan businesses. And yet you said that, there were tight-knit communities. So what would be some of those locations?
Yeah. I found St. Louis, Missouri, and Kansas City, as I just mentioned. I bring those up because those were the most interesting to me. I was expecting us to be eating like veganized Taco Bell for the entire week. But while we were there, we found some nice casual vegan dining, like mostly sandwiches, but still, people who knew how to use tempeh and other vegetables and how to saute. And let's see, there was also a Mud Pie Bakery, which was wonderful, had a wide assortment of different baked goods and different flavor profiles. And they were really, they did something too that I found that a lot of vegan businesses really take the opportunity to do, is that they're trying things out that aren't standard in in our current restaurant and food systems. So they're thinking, okay, we could try this flavor, we can try these emulsifiers, like these different things. Like I just found this so much creativity in what they were doing. And this doesn't just go for the Midwest, but for just all over. And that's kind of what led me to looking at my research project as we were starting up our, right after we started our website as well, is just I found that vegan entrepreneurs had great insight into how to engage with the philosophy and explore that philosophy through business and in a capitalistic setting. And at first I thought like, okay, this is just kind of interesting. But then I thought, okay, let's look into sources. And like there has been books about it. There have to be academic articles about it, particularly for business degrees and things like that. But the more I looked, and this was like around 2019 or so, and the more I looked, I didn't see any research on it. And that's what inspired me to get into looking at this phenomenon more closely in my grad school project.
Well, and I know that you really dug deep and you found 4 key areas that there seems to be a commonality. But I want to take a step back into when you became vegan and how it really transitioned from being vegan for your health, and it transitioned into now it's a complete lifestyle. It's a business. It's, your website is pretty interesting and you have a lot of locked content. How do people unlock that content? First of all, let's start with how do people find you? What's your web address? And then how do people get access to the content on your website? Because I found the category so fascinating and it's like, darn, it's locked. So tell us about that.
Thanks. Well, first, our website is www.itsbreeandben.com, and I'm sure you'll provide a link in the description.
Absolutely.
Of the website below. Awesome. Great. And from there, all our content is available. Nothing is locked. We have an assortment of subjects here. So we do talk about kind traveling, like I mentioned. Mm-hmm. So that's like, again, for those who want to go into destinations that they hadn't really thought about, or destinations they have thought about while traveling vegan. Nice. And they can see not only what restaurants and venues would facilitate their lifestyle or be friendly to their lifestyle, but also give them inspiration for travel tips that might be good for their personality, their energy. For example, we have an article, which I quite am fond of, just on how to travel as an introvert. If someone someone whose energy level is greatly affected by new stimulation.
Right.
It's not proper medical advice, but it is at least a template and a guide to get people thinking like, if I'm introverted, I get tired a lot by all the stimulation, just talking to people and meeting new people during the day. What are the ways I can still explore and have a good time, not be standoffish, but also respect myself and my energy?
I love that. Because, it's interesting, Ben, the longer I'm vegan, and I'm coming up on 5 years, and I started plant-based. It was like, I would not call myself a vegan because vegans were crazy. And now I proudly call myself vegan. My business is Vegan Visibility. I have Vegan Visibility Production. So it's kind of like, okay, I crossed that invisible line. But what I have found is the longer that I really honor this lifestyle, and I call it an honoring of the lifestyle because it's about sentient beings. It's about the environment. The harder sometimes it is for me to be around large groups of people, whether it be at the grocery store, whether it be at a gathering at a neighbor's house. But I find that I'm much more sensitive to energies. And I've been studying energy for, 45, 50 years now. I had quite a long time. Yeah. And so I like the idea of you having tips, and I'll have to check that again because I kept getting this little notice, protected content, and it was like, darn, this is like really interesting content. I want to read it. So with what you have done in being a vegan, you started in 2015. Did I get that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, that's when we started experimenting that, and then by 2016 we were like working towards a vegan path, and then by 2017, I know we were really on the vegan bandwagon.
So tell me how it's different for you from when you started, and you started in the Bay Area. Was it in San Francisco itself? Because I actually used to live in San Francisco, Sonoma County, San Jose, the whole Bay Area, North Bay and South Bay.
Right on.
Yeah. So when you first started, how did all that shift and transpire for you with your wife? And did you get married on the road? Did you get married before you hit the road? I find that really fascinating.
Oh man, I would love to. If we had gotten married on the road, man, I could just see our parents just being like, "You did what?" Yeah, why don't you like us? No, we got married actually right before. We were living in Los Angeles.
Okay.
And, so we had an apartment at that point. I was working as a full-time travel agent at the time, and that was another thing too. While we were on the road, we were working full time. It wasn't like we're just taking a big long vacation. I was working 8 hours a day, Monday through Friday, remotely from a computer. So I would, help out my clients. And then the thing that was interesting about that is that the more east we got, my hours were shifting. So they got to the point where, originally I would start at 8 o'clock, and then, eventually you'd be starting work at like 12 o'clock noon by the time I got to the Maritimes. And then you'd be working till 8 in the night. But in terms of that journey, so to kind of since you asked to break down the chronology of it. So started to explore it in 2015 and experiment with different things. And then 2016, still trying out new things, progressing towards that. And then we got engaged in late 2016. And then we got married in February of 2017. And by that time we were, planning the wedding, and then we were also planning to do the road trip and putting our things in storage and stopping our rent for our apartment the following month. So we left in March, and then after hitting some destinations in California, we continued up in April. And during that whole time, we were just sticking to plant-based and vegan restaurants. I mean, there's some destinations like there's some destinations that were like I remember Saskatoon, I think, had one restaurant had vegan options and it was technically vegetarian. So that's why I say we stopped at a lot of plant-based places as well. But those two were very interesting because they were like this little island in the sea, and experimenting with this philosophy and also being creative as possible, and got this. And I really just remarked on how innovative that they were thinking in that space, and trying to source like local things like Saskatoon berries, featuring them in their vegan desserts and things like that. I was like, wow, that's an ingredient you don't really see very much, and it's great to see it featured here, and it seems familiar to people who live there. So yeah, that was the chronology of it. And then from basically February of 2017, March of 2017 through November, that's when we were traveling just across the continent, to Halifax, and then on the way back. And yeah, Bree was writing about these businesses, and I was just kind of noticing these themes that I mentioned. And we had collected so much stuff on our own, and this was before I was thinking of my grad school project, but we'd collected so much data on our own, and we wanted to feature this on a proper website, just so that it was accessible to anyone who would be interested in it. And if you look on our website, we try to keep it very accessible. And
I like your website. It's very playful. It's like it's got a different flavor to it, no pun intended. But it's playful, it's creative, and it feels engaging. So
thanks.
I really like that.
Yeah, the idea is that again, and this is what I've encountered too, is that there is such a over the years, and while I think activism and the seriousness of animal rights is important, I think a big facet of veganism that a lot of people overlook is that it is a wonderful lifestyle that is inclusive, that is fun. It allows you to experiment and explore different avenues of empathy and exercise empathy in ways that we haven't thought. And that doesn't leave anything out. Like, a lot of people think that veganism is lacking something, like lacking a certain food item or nourishment or experiences. And I find it exactly the opposite. It provides a framework to experience a great deal more with experimenting with different recipes and different ingredients that you never thought would be. Who would have thought that chickpea water could be used as like an emulsifier, or right. That's so creative, and it's wonderful to kind of work in that chemistry. Or looking at veganism, I write about this in some of my articles, as a framework for people to explore their cultural identity, and or even experimenting with like shopping and trying to, it's hard to escape our capitalistic society, but what if we were to at least use that capitalism system, but still shop kindly, or still consume kindly?
I love that. And you have a lot of that on your site about being kind. And, something that I found fascinating when we talked prior to having this conversation today was the research that you did. And you came up with the 4 different areas that were very prevalent in the research that you did to do with entrepreneurs, the 4 different points. So I want to delve into that, because a lot of people that listen to my podcast and watch the podcast, they are entrepreneurs. And it's interesting because one of the things I've done in my own business, I've had my business 30 years. And a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago, just as the pandemic was starting and they were doing the shutdowns, I had to decide, am I going to keep doing my business? Because I really took a nosedive as a result of the pandemic as a keynote speaker. Yeah, it actually turned out to be a blessing. You know, I've learned by this point, I went through 9/11 where my business tanked. I went through 2008, the business tanked. And each time I had the opportunity to really evaluate what's working, what do I need to let go of? And in your research, you found some interesting information about what the 4 main points for entrepreneurs are. And what I decided to do back about 2 years ago was really identify as a vegan-based business who wanted to work with vegan businesses. And I tell you, I got all the cautions from non-vegans, like, it's going to kill your business. It's like, no, the pandemic already did it. As a keynote speaker, literally about 80 to 90% of my revenue got wiped out. And a very, very healthy multiple six-figure business at that point. And for about a year, I was kind of, treading water, like, okay, is this the right move? And I went to other vegan business owners. But the one thing I noticed was there were a lot of vegan businesses that wouldn't identify as vegan only. And now we're seeing more and more of that. But let's really dig into, and which, by the way, identifying as a vegan business, working with vegans, because I'm a marketer and a consultant, best choice I ever made, because the business now is just starting to explode in a great way. But with that being said, the 4 points, I wrote them down. There's the health, inclusivity, vegan phobia, which I definitely want to talk about that, and the cost of doing business. Those are the main concerns with vegan entrepreneurs. So tell us about your research. How long did you do the research? How many people did you interview? What was the whole premise of that?
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for asking. I'm really excited to share those. So to get into those 4 points, it's probably best for me to back up and talk about the project from the beginning.
Right.
So like I said, in 2019, I started thinking about the themes that I'd seen along my travels across the United States from 2017 through 2018. And we were addressing some of these on my website, but as I thought, and that was wonderful for me, but as I wanted to dig deeper into those themes, as I kind of wanted to explain what I was seeing more through concepts and theories, I found there was very little academic literature in the business world or in philosophy or social sciences that really discussed what I was seeing. I mean, there were some that were really great, like Jessica Greenbaum had some good articles there talking about stigma and veganism, but there wasn't a whole lot else from that. So I was thinking, like, this would maybe make for a good grad school project. And but at the time I was thinking, I'm working full time as a travel agent, and I'm got a website. Don't know if I want to do that. But then 2020 occurred, and we all know what happened there. So at the beginning, recap on that. Oh, no, people are like, no, recap, please.
Ouch.
Please, yeah. Keeps going. So in early 2020, that's when the pandemic hit, and I was furloughed. It was in my travel agency job. And I was kind of thinking, okay, you know what? Maybe it's time, now that I have the means to explore the phenomena that I wanted to see in grad school. Maybe I can find something that I can add to the literature and kind of contribute that way. So I did some research, and I found a university in British Columbia that was very interested in looking at environmental studies and social sciences and looking at them together. It's the University of Northern British Columbia. Actually, kind of wearing my alumni pin right now. I just want to do a little shout out to them. So, and I had some meeting with some advisors, and I will admit the theme of vegophobia, or just being a little trepidatious about admitting I'm vegan, was especially in an academic setting, did linger in my mind. I'm already have an anxiety disorder, so I'm kind of thinking like, oh no, they might not like me, and then they especially won't like me if I just say the V word out loud. So when I pitched it, like when I first met with my advisors, as we were thinking what kind of project we could do, I kept on thinking like, oh, it's about social sciences and stewardship and health, and I was kind of thinking like, okay, we could look at this as a business aspect and all that. And then I give my advisors a lot of credit to this. A few months into it, after I got some classes out of the way, they kind of noticed like, I don't know, there's something missing, Ben, that like a framework or just like a perspective that we need to make this work and to make this a solid project. And I feel like you kind of have an idea. And what is that? And that's when I realized, wow, my advisors are really thinking of me. And I thought, maybe it's safe to say. And so I said, all right, well, I would very much like to look at phenomena that are particular to the vegan experiences for vegan entrepreneurs and see the themes that they go through. And they said, that's great. That's actually a great idea. And I kind of had a moment of, really? So I do admit, needless to say, I learned a lot of confidence from grad school, and not being too afraid to just say that out loud. I'm sure you've gone through the same thing too, where it's like, okay, once you know people are not so scared, or that there is just that community that could support you, or at least people who are willing to listen to you, then you feel emboldened and good to explore what you really want to explore. So I give a lot of thanks to my advisors for that. Then I started developing a project, and I knew that I wanted to do this. I wanted to look at vegan entrepreneurs and explore what phenomena and themes that they were experiencing, particularly in the city of Vancouver. I had visited Vancouver twice in those 2 years that I've been traveling, and I found that it was, at the time of my study, home to the most vegan entrepreneurs and most vegan businesses per capita. I should note at the time of this recording, in Canada, that title is contentious. Right now, it's always flipping between Toronto and Vancouver. So who knows when this is out what that status will be? But at the time, it was definitely Vancouver. So in the end, after a few months of research and structuring this thing and working with my advisors, I created a project in which I would visit 12 vegan businesses in the Vancouver neighborhoods of Mount Pleasant and Kitsilano. And I can name off those those businesses to you right now if you'd like.
Sure, go ahead.
Great. The first one that I saw, and I'll describe what they are too. These weren't just restaurants. That was really great. They actually touched a lot of different industries. The first one was Be My Guest, which is a food delivery service for vegan options from a myriad of chefs in the area. And the second one was Blue Heron Cheese, which is owned by Lumi Foods. They provide a nut-based vegan cheese products. Next was Fairy Cakes. It has since closed, unfortunately, but they wonderful selections of baked goods and sweets that were not just vegan, but also non-allergenic. So that was one of the points of pride for the owner, is that
gluten-free and all that.
Gluten-free, nut-free.
Nice.
And I will say they were fantastic. Again, such creativity and trying with different meringues and flavors and things there. So the idea was that, I'll touch about this a little later, but just that anyone could eat it. So it was that kind. After that was a fine dining vegan restaurant called Folk Restaurant. And the next one, there was Kind Cafe, which was like a sandwichery, eatery, restaurant. Fast casual, I think you can describe it as that.
Okay.
Level 5 Bakery, which was a kind of Canadian Asian fusion bakery, and wonderful place in town. I mean, all of these businesses are my favorites, but Level 5 is one that's particularly very creative and very fun to visit. Next is Nutty, which is a cafe, but they specialize in nut-based milks of different types, like macadamia and other ones that you don't really think about in their selections. The Cider House, which was not only the first cidery in Vancouver, but happens to be vegan as well. Then there's Tintery Brows, which is a eyebrow tint manufacturer whose ingredients are all vegan. And what's also great about them is that they produce a wide range of tints for different skin tones.
And what are they called? Tints and what?
Tintery Brows.
Tintery Brow. Okay. Glad you mentioned that, and then I'll get you back to your list. But a lot of times people don't realize the amount of animal testing that goes on for cosmetics, hair products, and things of that nature. And for vegans, I know for myself, when I first started the whole journey, I didn't even think about that. As I went into it, it was like, I will not buy any personal care products that are not free of animal cruelty and animal testing. So, okay, so go back to your list.
No problem. Yeah, I know that is a particular topic that is very we need to explore. A lot of people overlook.
Absolutely.
But the last three were are/were True Nosh, which makes vegan-based sauces that are of Asian-inspired flavorings.
Nice.
So like oyster sauces, but actually made of oyster mushrooms, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah. Plant University, which is operated by the Vancouver Humane Society. They provide educational services for on plant-based lifestyle and vegan lifestyles by extension. So information-based rather than actual products, but they still allow that to be there. And Viva's Pet Foods, which is a vegan dog food company. They provide treats and kibble for dogs. And I have to admit, that one was wonderful because not only did I get to talk to entrepreneurs who were wonderful and very insightful, the owner was a biochemist, so I was like, I got to hear her intellect in describing the phenomena that she was experiencing. But the dogs that were coming by, it was at a farmer's market, so their dogs are coming by and their owners, and the dogs were just scarfing everything down that all the treats.
It's amazing that how much dogs actually love vegetable-based foods. A good friend of mine, she was the founder of V-Dog, which is out of San Francisco. It's a vegan dog food company, and my business partner has put her dog on that brand full time, and she said he is doing so well. He's actually getting more trim. He's got more energy, and he's about 8 or 10 years old. So he's starting to get his youthful vibrancy back. And, so there is something to be said for vegan dog food companies. But now, in your research of all these companies, you came up with the 4 points. I really want to dig deep into what the greatest concerns for vegan business owners would be, because in my own business, I look for those companies that I can help to raise their visibility. And knowing this is really valuable information. So let's dig a little deeper into the 4 points with entrepreneurs that you discovered.
Yeah, I'd love to. So as my project involved talking to the entrepreneurs or the managers who ran these businesses, and just getting to know what their experiences were in operating them, and especially in these neighborhoods. These neighborhoods, I should mention, have a long history of being very veggie forward, veggie friendly. They were around during the counterculture movements of the 20th century. So I thought, hey, this might be a great place to see kind of veganism explored over a continuum. And what was interesting is that from all of them, I found the 4 points that you mentioned, which were common phenomena that they had experienced, and that I found particularly fascinating. So the first one that I found was that these entrepreneurs cited that the perceived benefits of health towards veganism were their impetus or the reason why they got into establishing a vegan business in the first place. I and some other sources I'd read kind of assumed that stewardship would have been the impetus or their motivator for going into vegan business, but it was actually health. For example, the founder of Fairy Cakes that I had mentioned before, she created non-allergenic recipes so that all customers, regardless of their health conditions or dietary needs, could enjoy lovely confections and not have to worry too much about health, like worry about sugar intake too
right.
And then you just mentioned Viva's Pet Foods and your friend who's in that space, the co-founder of Viva's Pet Foods. She got inspired by that because her dogs in childhood had died prematurely due to malnutrition, and she, being a chemist and a scientist herself, she wanted to see what ways could be done to lend to better canine health through diet, and that's what led her to form this business. And the founders of Be My Guest and True Nosh all had family members who had diabetes and hypertension, respectively, and they determined at home that, if we experience with some vegan recipes, that could lend to at least making their conditions better.
Right.
And they did, and they wanted to, once they found that they decided to branch that and apply that to their business models. And it was really wonderful seeing. I did, again, this is kind of true to the research. I do, and again, I don't like to do blanket statements. I'm sure there are a lot of vegan businesses who wanted to go into stewardship or other reasons I hadn't mentioned or thought of before. So this isn't like a universal blanket monolithic statement, but it does seem to be a predominantly common one, especially in that geographical area. And I do attribute that to a phenomenon that I found, which was called perspective transformation. And I think a lot of us as vegans are familiar with it. It's described in 1978 by Jack Mezirow as basically a cognitive process in which when we perceive a paradigm or something that we learn about our society or environment that isn't working anymore. So for example, the idea that we eat animal products and we have to have that, we learn that in early development, and then that becomes a pillar of our concept of the world around us.
Right.
But then we see evidence that that is not working, that there are a lot of ills to it that actually lead to more harm as we go along. And that the perspective transformation is the instance where we actually do a paradigm shift in our minds and start to re-script what we think would work for us or how things should be. And that seeing that happen, especially in a business context, really lent to that being a very common one that I think all of us as vegans kind of experience.
Right.
So it was wonderful to have that. Again, that's what I was looking for in the first place, was these concepts to explain these phenomena, and I was starting to find it. And this is great. Should I continue on to the next?
Please do. Please do.
That's great. So in addition to health, many of the vegan entrepreneurs I spoke to saw that veganism was a framework for inclusivity and helping inclusivity in their business spaces. As I mentioned, Fairy Cakes was, they wanted to be an inclusive space to all dietary needs, and anyone, like they had very inexpensive cupcakes to really, like even more expensive cakes. And it was all meant for people of different incomes and also dietary needs to enjoy. Be My Guest was particularly interesting because it wasn't just like a food-based like delivery service like DoorDash, but they actually tried to source ingredients from chefs and cuisine from chefs who, during the pandemic in particular, didn't have the spaces or the means to operate full-on restaurants.
Right.
So not only was it a way to help small entrepreneurial chefs and reaching out to customers who they never would have reached anyway, but it was also a way for them to feature chefs of different backgrounds. So those who were dabbling in indigenous cuisine, Italian, Indian and South Asian, African cuisine. It was like a great smorgasbord of the world in terms of cuisine. So, and the owner attributed to veganism because it is based in doing no harm. Therefore, you want to include as many people in the benefits of whatever it is you're doing.
Right.
So that's lent to that model. And another one that was really great was Cider House. The cidery that I had mentioned. So most pubs do have what one could describe as very masculine trappings. So if you go into a bar, the first thing you think about in your archetype in your mind is that, you think of dark colors, hues that are not so welcoming, and just basically things that feel, trappings that make it feel like the space is closed off.
Right, right.
But they wanted to do the opposite. They thought that if it's vegan, again, wanting to be more welcoming and help and be kind to the most number of people. Therefore, they wanted to expand it to people of different palates and preferences. So they shifted from a more masculine bar setting to give a more sense of safety to women and other genders by brightening the space, making it more open, having regular drag nights and other events that lent to people of all genders and all races being in one spot. And as I mentioned before, Tintory Brows, in wanting to engage with the vegan philosophy and kind to all people, they thought that, hey, well, not only will we make this vegan, but we'll be kind to humans as well by letting the skin tone of our products range from darker skin tones to the lightest skin tones. And so that philosophy, I found, provided a guidance. Again, just even something as simple as do the least amount of harm and include the most number of people as you can. And that that mindset just let them flourish with these models that they had. So these are all great, but of course, there are difficulties that any philosophy or any movement has to go through. And that is what I found by researchers like Cole and Morgan and others, and what they describe as vegaphobia, or discrimination against veganism and the practice of it and those who practice it. I promise not to name names, but there was one business that I spoke to in particular where they got a very popular and prominent vegan certification. And,
Right.
and I do, when they were talking to me and I was having the conversations with them, I know like, oh, that certification is really hard to get and takes a lot of money and time to get. And I said, I see it's not in your window. Why is that? And they responded, well, if I put that up in my window, someone's going to take it down right away, and it's actually going to drive people away. And I said, so why do you have it in the first place? I mean, I didn't mean to seem incredulous or to be passionate, but I was just like, it's fascinating. It's like you get accreditation to draw people in, to make them feel
Right.
safer. And this was an instance in which they were feeling like they got it, but there was concern that it was driving people away. So I was curious about that. And they explained that, and again, I'm paraphrasing here, but they said like, well, the certification's for people like you, people who are already vegan and who are engaged with philosophy, or at least warm to it. And so that they know that if they're walking in, they can see it and they know it's fine. But
Right.
They have it there, and they'll show it if someone asks about it. And I thought that was fascinating. And that there's that still, even a city that is reputably very vegan friendly.
Right. Right.
There's still that concern. And I found in other conversations, people had mentioned instances of people like them feeling restricted to those two neighborhoods I mentioned, either Mount Pleasant or Kitsilano,
Right,
because
right.
they went to other neighborhoods, they wouldn't find the support that they would want. There were also reports, and not all, but there were some reports of visitors being aggressive and saying slurs to them as they walked in the spaces.
Oh, well, let me ask you this on that. And
Yeah.
was it that came from vegans or non-vegans? Because I know even within the vegan space, which, I find interesting, there are silos, and I'm a better vegan than you are because I do activism or whatever.
Yeah.
And, I do see some discrimination within the vegan movement, which it boggles my mind, because if anything, we should be collaborating and looking for the similarities rather than the differences. So when people would be aggressive, was it coming from non-vegans or from vegans?
Great question. I'm afraid I can't answer that succinctly, because the parameters of my project did not allow me to look into the sentiments or motivations of customers necessarily, just the experiences of the entrepreneurs.
Okay.
But I could definitely see it coming from both sides, honestly, and I think that lends to something in our community that we need to address. And this is a little bit of a tangent from the themes I was talking about, but. To kind of preface it, veganism, at least the way I see it, and I think many people do, it's a holistic philosophy,
Right.
that it's utilitarian in nature. Basically, like classic utilitarianism, meaning that you do the most good and to do the least amount of harm as you can with any decision you make. Now, I think many vegans and leaders in our communities love that and are trying to do and are aiming towards that and doing great at it. But there are some who want to make sure that there's no room for error in that, and that in order to provide kindness for all non-humans, environment and animals and plant life, that we have to be extra strict on people. So I can definitely see vegans. I can see that there might be some instances in which vegans might be doing that to each other, especially on social media.
Right.
And I haven't done official studies on that, but there are, from what I've gleaned, there is enough. I think there's arguably a case for that.
Right. Right.
Now, from non-vegans too, I can definitely see that as well. It's just that, and I attribute this to a little bit of the history of how veganism and vegetarianism have been perceived throughout, and how it kind of stands. First and foremost, veganism still has the ugly trappings of the marketing world that's inflicted upon it in, like I said, both marketing commercials and in media. What I mean by that is, in media, vegans, if they're even mentioned at all, are always the eco-terrorists who are typically really, they're unhinged, they're very stressed out, they in many ways hate themselves, they hate the people around them, and then they value the cause as being their ultimate end-all be-all, their raison d'etre, and they leave little room for error or love in any other capacity in their life. Case examples I saw is I don't want to promote these shows necessarily, but there was a show I saw recently called American Housewife, in which the neighbor was vegan, and she was just this very posh character who was just really struggling with trying to put on that lifestyle and try to be vegan. But in the end, she and her rest of her family really wanted not to be. And I've seen cop shows too. And there was one that I particularly like with Eric McCormick called Perception. And they arrest like a vegan terrorist cell, those who are trying to, I think they're just trying to sabotage a truck.
Right.
Yeah. So, and as I'm looking around, and I'm actually very fascinated by this, but there's very little in media that showcase those with environmentalist leanings or vegan leanings, and those who are vegan themselves, or characters who pronounce themselves as vegan. There are very few of them. And I think the only ones I can really find are the character, the girl from Babysitter's Club, and and others escape me at the moment. But it's just very hard to see veganism portrayed as just someone who, like, I look forward to the day and seeing media in which there's just a character who is vegan but doesn't just say it out loud.
It's no big deal. It's like, recently I went to a gathering where it was a great group of people, and I live in a rural community in Oregon, so there's a lot of people that are into humane killing of animals, and it's like, okay, whatever. But it was a gathering. There were probably about 15 people there. I was the only vegan, but I have to say I got so much respect from people, because the gentleman who was doing the barbecuing, he said, I've got a place on our grill that we never cook meat. He goes, because we know there are some people that don't want the meat to touch, and he used separate utensils, and he said, would that work for you? And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so awesome. And they really went out of their way to make it as comfortable as possible for me. And I didn't make a big deal out of it going into the situation, but a lot of people know that I don't consume any animal or dairy. And I just really felt respected by virtue of the fact that he pointed out how he was going to really protect my space and my energy. Yeah. And, to me, that was so, so nice. And it's interesting, because if carnivores come into my home, I don't cook meat for them. It's like, you're going to eat vegan. That's just the way it is. And they're often surprised at how with most foods, they don't even know it's vegan. They're already eating a lot of vegan food anyway. So anyway, with that, then there was the, we've got the health, the inclusivity, the vegaphobia, and then the cost of doing business.
Yeah, sure. So just kind of wrap up really quickly what I was talking about. Like, we definitely need to have more of a better image in media, and also marketing. I think is still there's still too many ads showcasing vegan products for being elitist, white, and on the coast, as I say.
You are correct. Or there's a lot of greenwashing that goes on, like a company that, we have a plant-based product, and it's like, well, plant-based is not necessarily vegan, because you can look at the ingredients and it's got eggs, it's got egg whites, it's got milk and dairy byproducts. So anyway. But that would be a fascinating episode to do just on media. So
exactly. Yeah.
When you write the book on it, we'll have to have you back on it. But let's talk about the cost of doing business. You said that was a big concern about for entrepreneurs, which it crosses every industry. So what did you discover on that?
That was the fourth point that I discovered. It was a common theme. It was that the cost of doing business and just the cost of living in these cities, it was just becoming a great concern to vegan entrepreneurs who spoke to. All of them mentioned that the cost of doing business was skyrocketing. I did some research on this, and while I couldn't ask what the rent was for each of these businesses, just given the parameters of the project, because I couldn't ask anything about like IP or their particular operations there, but I could ask about their sentiments about what they're feeling. They were saying that rent was going up, and it was really making them feel hindered in what they could do and how secure they felt about continuing on.
Right.
And I did some research on my own to look into this. The rent in Vancouver, just in the past 2 years that I've been doing the study, had risen by an average of 14%. Now, that's for apartments, but you can kind of extrapolate and kind of think broadly, like,
Right.
okay, if the rent is going up for households for 14%, then one can only imagine what it's going like for businesses, especially in well-established affluent areas like Kitsilano and Mount Pleasant. So, and in addition to that, since the beginning of the pandemic, the cost of goods has been going up. So that was the cost of everything from grains to legumes to vegetables, anything that any of these businesses would need as a primary ingredient.
Right.
Emulsifiers for the tint brows, or some of the the pigmentations that they would need. Those are all just going up in price. So that's leading to concern. And I found this fascinating because I think the biggest argument against veganism and vegan business, and you said that you've encountered this too, is that everyone thinks that if you're vegan, you're going to lose business because no one wants to see that. But that was the fascinating thing there. That was the contrary was happening.
Right.
And when I was talking to these businesses, all of them mentioned increased interest in their businesses. Not only were customers staying, according to what they were saying, but they were staying, but demand and frequency from patronage was going up from the beginning of the pandemic to now, and I imagine they're continuing to. So the idea, or the fallacy that vegan businesses are just losing steam or that no one's interested in them is just that, a fallacy. What's happening is that the costs of just operating, not just them, but just any business, I think, in general, because rent affects everyone, not just vegans, but everyone.
Right.
Everything is just getting to be so expensive that it's starting to create not just a chokehold on those that are already there, but also creates a barrier to entry for more entrepreneurs and new ones who have a new idea that want to set up shop in a particular space.
Absolutely. I was actually recently looking at the cost of living in the Bay Area, because I grew up in San Jose, lived in San Francisco, lived in the Santa Rosa area, the Russian River area.
Oh, cool. I grew up in Pleasanton, by the way. Do you know Pleasanton?
Okay.
Yeah.
I know, my grandmother lived in Dublin, and so every Sunday we'd go there, we'd watch Ed Sullivan, and we would watch the Lawrence Welk show. She'd cook a big meal, and then we'd have to clean up. So I do remember, I have fond memories of that time. But what I found interesting is, houses, for example. My sister lives in Campbell, and she and her husband have been there for many, many years. But about a 1,000 to 1,200 square foot home on average was between $1,500,000 and $2 million, and the mortgage was estimated to be at about $10,000 a month. And I'm thinking, how can people afford that? The average, and where I live, we bought our house 17 years ago, so we're in a great position. We have 5 acres. We live in it's a really nice community, and I could not afford to buy my own house today. I mean, that's the fact of the matter. But it's kind of crazy when you look at that separation, which we could probably have a whole nother episode on that. But Ben, this has been fascinating. I just have really, really enjoyed your insights, and definitely want to have you back. But in closing, Ben, what are your final thoughts for people?
I would say, first and foremost, be kind to yourself. If you're experiencing the vegan philosophy, know that it's not about limiting yourself or putting a cap on anything in your life. It's a way to explore, and a way to find ways to be empathetic and to yourself and those around you, and to be creative in spaces and ways that you never thought of before. Also, I really hope that any of your listeners in Vancouver or elsewhere really pay attention to and support their fellow vegan businesses and entrepreneurs wherever they can. As I mentioned, the interest is there, but the economic forces and the systems that we've created in our societies and in our cities are really making it harder for them and everyone to operate. So when you can't, like, if it's as simple as thinking like, oh, I'm going to get a coffee. Well, I could go to Starbucks, or, oh wait, there's a new vegan cafe that just opened down the block.
Absolutely.
It's another block down, but I can, that time I'm supporting them. So just think about, do research like Happy Cow or other resources to see where your vegan businesses are, and then go visit them. And of course, if you ever need any travel tips or are interested in any themes that you're thinking about as you're exploring this lifestyle or as you're planning your travel, feel free to visit itsbreeandben.com. And our handles on Instagram and Facebook are @itsbreeandben.
Wonderful.
So just search for us there. And I also want to say, if anyone is interested in doing collaborations with me or wants to look at a particular phenomena that are related to anything I talked about, I'd be delighted. Just feel free to send me a DM on there, or you can write to me directly at contact@itsbreeandben.com.
All right. Well, Ben, it has been delightful. I've been talking with Ben Hagerty of itsbreeandben.com. And this is Kathleen Gage with Vegan Visibility, encouraging you. Listen to this episode a few times because there's a lot of great information. Subscribe to this channel wherever you're listening or watching, and go out and live a kind life. This is Kathleen Gage wishing you a great day, a great evening, a great middle of the night, whenever you may be consuming this. Have a great day.
You've been listening to the Vegan Visibility Podcast Show. Be sure to subscribe to get notified when the next episode is live. And we always appreciate reviews. Join us next time for more inspiration, education, and motivation to build your business one cruelty-free and healthy person at a time.